Hi, I'm Dave Kydd, and this is the second episode in the I Am podcast. The Internal Art Museum is composed of these images that I use when I'm counseling. I've noticed over the years that these images, these metaphors that I use are very helpful for me to conceptualize the ideas I'm trying to communicate, and it seems helpful to clients as well. We start off with some global pictures. These images can be used as a foundation for personal growth, and I feel like they can be helpful in all areas of life. So this next foundational image is going to be imagining your life like a movie. So that's the task for today. Imagine your life like a movie. Let's explore. So let's start by talking about this beautiful picture that my daughter Lily drew. She's an amazing artist. You saw her first painting picture, and this is her second. Let's start by explaining this, because this is obviously a physical manifestation of the metaphor that we're talking about. So that little guy, of course, is me, and this angry cloud is supposed to represent a villain. So the metaphor, seeing your life like a movie, there's lots of popular movies these days where there's a powerful villain who acts as the antagonist and tries to make life difficult for the protagonist. If our life is like a movie, the question is, who is the villain in our life movie? So first of all, let's back up. I believe that there's two sources of influence in the world: a trustworthy source and an untrustworthy source. Now, how you explain this, I don't think is actually important. There's lots of different ways to break it down depending on what your worldview is, what your philosophy is. You can imagine Solzhenitsyn, who talks about the line between good and evil running down the middle of each man's heart. You can look at it in a religious context, so good and evil, light versus dark, or you can just see it as a mental exercise, as a rubric, as a heuristic, something that you can play with to help you understand and identify what thoughts you should pay attention to and what thoughts need to be discarded. So I believe it's our life's purpose to become the best version of ourselves. And this untrustworthy source in the world, this influence of the untrustworthy source, its job is to pull us away from becoming the best version of ourselves. Whereas the trustworthy source helps move us towards this best version of ourselves. So how does all of this look in practice? If that's the theory, how we listen to this trustworthy source and use it to become our best selves, how does that look in practice? Well, here's where the metaphor comes in, the life being like a movie. So as I explained it, we're the main character, obviously, the protagonist in our life movie, and this untrustworthy source becomes the problem. We can personify the problem. So you may be saying, well, problems are an important part of life. Without problems, we wouldn't build resilience and strength. We wouldn't learn things and we wouldn't grow. I absolutely agree. Problems aren't the problem. In fact, I wouldn't call our problems problems per se. I would call them difficulties or challenges. And where we get into trouble is when we use the untrustworthy source to try to help us solve these difficulties and challenges. That's where it becomes a problem. So we've got our problem villain, and we've got you, the main character. So in therapy, once we set that up, this idea of the problem being the villain in your life movie and you being the protagonist, then we have to motivate you as the client to fight against this problem. Why is this problem the bad guy? Because you have to believe in your heart of hearts that this problem villain is the bad guy. Its power comes from making you believe that it's the good guy. This is what's so tricky about the problem villain, whatever it is. It wants you to believe that it's the trustworthy source. And so you need a way of trying to figure out all right, do you hear that clickety click click? That's our Charlie. This is our Charlie Kydd. So you heard all that clickety click? That's what we call clickbaits. Goodbye, Charlie. So we were talking about how to frame this for clients. And the first step is to set up this metaphor of the problem villain being the antagonist in your life movie and you obviously being the protagonist. The next step is to get client buy-in regarding the actual untrustworthiness of the problem villain. It sounds intuitive, right? You'd think, why would anybody trust the villain? The problem is this villain is super clever and paints himself in a righteous role where he tries to make you believe that it has your best interests in mind. It's keeping you safe. It's keeping you on the right path. All of which, of course, are lies, but it's so persuasive that it tricks you into believing this. And so we have to start off by pulling you away from the clutches of this problem villain. It's kind of like it's got this spell over you, and we have to break that spell somehow. So I asked the client, what are the effects of this problem villain on your life? So Lily, name a problem.
Health anxiety.
Health anxiety, okay. Health anxiety, yeah, that's a good one. All right. So let's say the problem villain is health anxiety. Your problem villain, its first message to you is, I'm going to keep you safe. I'm the one that highlights all of the symptoms you should worry about and all of the threats to your safety and health that are out there. So you have to listen to me, which sounds very compelling, obviously. So I would start off by asking a client with health anxiety, so this health anxiety villain, what effects does it have on your life? And so Lil, let's imagine that you're the client and I asked you that. What kind of effects might this health anxiety have on your life as this imaginary client?
Like keeping you from taking risks.
Absolutely. Okay. So one effect might be this health anxiety keeps you from taking risks and then just scrubs from the board lots of opportunities for success and achievement, because most opportunities for success and achievement involve a little bit of risk. Your health anxiety villain, even though it says it's got your best interests in mind, really doesn't want you to live your best life. And so it'll try to take those opportunities away by telling you, hey, I've got your best interests in mind. Don't do that stuff. That might be an effect of health anxiety for sure. How might it affect relationships? Well, what I've heard clients say is, let's say they're married and they have health anxiety. It really stresses their spouse out because the client is stressed out all the time about their health, always going to emerge and always worried that there's something wrong with them, right? That's going to have a negative impact on the person that you love the most. They love you and they see you in distress And that can negatively impact the relationship, right? So that's another effect. Is there a hand up in the back? Yes.
And
Lily.
you, the client, worrying about that.
Yes, absolutely. That's right. So there can be this kind of reciprocal worry. So another more global effect of this health anxiety villain is it takes your contentment and happiness, right? So we could go down, oftentimes clients will have like 10, 15 things on that list, and they're all really bad. And so we go through that list. Already we've got, takes away your happiness and adds stress to you, adds stress to your loved ones, and can negatively impact the relationship. And what was the first one? Keeping you from taking risks, right? So there's those three effects. So if there's a real person in your life that has this negative effect on you, how would you feel towards that person? And everybody says, I would not like that person. And then I would ask, would you trust somebody that has those serious negative effects on you and wants those negative things for you in your life? Would you trust somebody that you know wants to take away your happiness and negatively impact your relationships? No, of course you wouldn't. So your problem villain is that person. And then we pivot to seeing that problem villain as an untrustworthy source. So now we can kind of move to another image. An image for a source is a well, right? A well is a source for water. So the problem villain we can cast as a poison well. Everything coming from that well is going to be poison. That's really useful then, because you don't have to test every cup that comes up from that well. Maybe this one is not poison. Maybe this one's not poison. Maybe this one's not poison. If it comes from the poison well, it's always going to be poison. So your job is very, very easy. Once you find out that this well is poison, your only job is to never drink from it. And that's a pretty easy job. So that is helpful, I think, but it's only part of the story, because if you're walking through the desert and you come across one well and it says poison, it's good for you to know that it's poison, but eventually you're going to die of thirst. So you're going to need some place to drink from, just like you need some sorts of knowledge, something that you can consult with deep within yourself when you're trying to make your most important life decisions on a daily basis. So you need to consult something. Now you know what you can't consult. You can't consult this poison well, this untrustworthy source, this problem villain. Well, I believe that there are actually two wells. So now let's imagine you're walking through the desert and you come across two wells. One says poison and the other says pure. Are you ever going to drink from the poison well? Lily, are you ever going to drink from the poison well? No, you're not, right? You're not going to drink from the poison well ever, because there's a pure option right beside it. So the question is, what is this pure option? Over the 25 years that I've been working with clients, everybody that I've talked to ends up having a voice within them that speaks the truth and that they can trust. I don't know why, but everybody I've talked to has this. And so I assume now that every client that I talk to has this as well, and I've yet to be disappointed. So I think by now, I'm prepared to believe that this is inherent in all humans. A voice within you that you can trust, which I call the trustworthy voice. It becomes the pure well now. And so now we're really cooking with gas, because we've got this poison well, which all we have to do is not drink from. And we've got this pure well, which speaks the truth and has our best interests in mind, that we can always drink from. So we've got this pure well and we got this poison well. Clients begin to start thinking along those lines, and they start listening for what thoughts might come from this problem villain and what thoughts might come from the trustworthy voice. I also actually like to name the problem villain based on the main issues that people are dealing with. So Sometimes it's a fairly prosaic name like the anxiety villain, the depression villain, the OCD villain. Other times people have more creative names for it. And that's always fun too. Whatever name they come up with, it has to capture the essence of the problem, because then when they're looking for it in their minds, it's easier to attach that villain to certain thoughts and identify which thoughts come from that untrustworthy source. So we've got this untrustworthy source, this villain, we've named it, and clients start looking for thoughts that come from this villain and listening for thoughts that come from this trustworthy voice. Often, clients don't believe they have this trustworthy voice, or they think that it's been silenced somehow. They're skeptical about whether or not they have it. And a fun little trick I like to use to expose this trustworthy voice is, I would say, all right, maybe you don't have this trustworthy voice. I don't know. But let's imagine if you did have this trustworthy voice. I don't know if you do or not. But if you did have this trustworthy voice, what would it say? And the funny thing is, most clients are able to answer that. And then bingo, they've got a trustworthy voice. And they can start to build that. It starts out as a whisper, it starts out as a maybe, and then it crescendos. And the more they listen for it, the more they can hear it. So that's the first part, is clients start working at sorting their thoughts into trustworthy and untrustworthy. So once clients start looking and listening for this villain and the trustworthy voice, then we can move to this 4-step process for dealing with problems in the moment. The first step is to identify thoughts coming from this problem villain. So if it's the health anxiety villain, you want to identify what thoughts are coming from it, because if you're not able to identify those thoughts, obviously you're not going to know what to trust and what not to trust. So that's the first step, identifying where this thought comes from. I'm having this thought right now that I should worry about this bump on my arm. Is that thought coming from my health anxiety villain, or is it coming from the trustworthy voice? So it's important to identify that. The second step then is to remind yourself that this anxiety villain, this health anxiety villain, the problem villain, is not a trustworthy source. It's a poison well. So again, you don't have to fight with that thought. You don't have to test that thought. All you have to do is dump that thought out. That's easy, right? So the second step is to remind yourself, problem villain, poison well, dump it out. The third step is to consult this trustworthy voice and see what it has to say, because it speaks the truth and it has your best interests in mind. It's not going to tell you that everything is rainbows and butterflies. It's not going to tell you you're perfect. If there's something about you that needs improving, it's going to tell you that. If there is something you need to worry about, it's going to tell you about that too. That health anxiety villain is going to tell you to worry all the time, right? Whereas the trustworthy voice is only going to tell you to worry when you really need to worry. So that's the third step. Consult the trustworthy voice to get the truth. And then once you know what you should believe from the trustworthy voice, your job is to ignore any subsequent thoughts coming from the problem villain, because it's not going to shut up at that point, right? It's going to keep at you and at you and at you until it can pull you in, hoping that it's going to use all of its dirty tricks to get you under that spell again. If we think about that well analogy, it's not this passive well that sits over there hoping you'll drink from it. This is like a sneaky salesman well that actively tries to trick you into drinking from it. So you're going to have to put a lot of effort into ignoring that voice now. That's the step 4, is to ignore the untrustworthy voice, the problem villain. So there are actually images attached to this as well. I'm not going to get into them because we'll talk about them in future podcasts. But the point is, you need some strategies for filling your mind up. An empty mind is fertile soil for the problem villain. You want to fill up your mind so there's no room, right? If your mind is full, the problem villain sends a thought. There's no room in it. It just bounces off and keeps going. And so you want to fill up your mind by focusing on your senses. By the way, mindfulness, filling your mind, right? That's where mindfulness comes from. So you want to fill your mind with the present. Being mindful is filling your mind with the present. And you fill your mind with the present by focusing on your senses. We'll also talk about that in future episodes when it comes to anxiety. But for now, conceptually, it's important that you know that. There's lots of different ways to do that. Practically speaking, there's the 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, where you look at 5 things you can see, 4 things you can hear, 3 things you can touch, 2 things you can taste, and 1 thing you can smell. If you're focused on your senses, you're in the present. But another great way to fill your mind, be mindful, is focus on your breathing as well. There's some super effective, fun, and pleasurable ways to use breathing strategies that really help focus your mind and calm you down. So you can use breathing to focus your mind on something, right? I'm counting my breaths, so I have to be in the present to think about that. And at the same time, you're physiologically calming your body down too. So you get a 2-for-1 deal there. So being present by focusing on your senses, practicing breathing techniques, both of them root you in the present, fill your mind, and help you to ignore the thoughts that you want to ignore. Another thing that clients like to do is use their own righteous anger against the problem villain. As we go through all the effects the problem villain's had on their life, they think, that sucks. I don't like the problem villain. I'm angry at the problem villain for doing all these things to me. And I'd like to sort of take the fight back to the problem villain. So they can protest the problem villain. They can do things on purpose that the problem villain doesn't want them to do as an act of protest. Villain doesn't want me to go to that party. I'm going to go to the party. Even though it might be uncomfortable, I'm there doing something that I enjoy with my friends, and I'm doing something that the problem villain doesn't want me to do. It's fun. It's fun disobeying the problem villain. You're giving the problem villain a problem, which is kind of cool. So that clients find helpful and energizing and fun too, right? They're taking the control back. They're gaining power over the problem villain, right? The problem villain said, I'm all powerful and you can't do this. And then you go do it. And the problem villain's like, well, I guess maybe I'm not all powerful then. And you can make a point of humiliating the problem villain, which is pretty cool. The last thing I'll say is it's important to get a measure of your success. As you're taking back your life from this problem villain, as you're learning to listen more to the trustworthy voice and less to that untrustworthy voice, it's important to capture your improvement. That motivates you and energizes you too, right? So you could say 3 months ago, my problem villain was 9 out of 10. It had almost complete control. Now, based on the stuff that I'm doing and the strategies that I've used, I think the problem villain is down to 6 out of 10, or maybe even 5 out of 10. So 5 out of 10, you've just reduced the power of the problem villain by almost a half. And that can be really gratifying and motivating. So I would encourage you to do that as well. And just keep in mind that you're never going to get it down to 0, right? But once it gets down to a certain number, like a 2 or a 3, it's so small and insignificant that you don't even have to care about it anymore. So if something weak is tiptoeing around your life, who cares? It doesn't stop you from doing anything. It doesn't have an effect anymore. And so you don't have to pay it any attention. So you figure out what that number is, 2, 3, whatever. Once you're at 5, you've only got a couple more to go, and then you'll be where you need to go. So now we come back to this beautiful painting. You remember the beautiful painting I talked about at the beginning? Yeah, you do. So the problem villain, this angry cloud, now this masked little guy, this puny, insignificant little guy, who I guess is me, now he's got some strategies for how to fight back. One of the main strategies that this problem villain uses is making you believe that it's bigger than it is. It actually has no power in the real world. No power. What I'll get clients to do sometimes is, you know what agoraphobia is? So the fear of the outside world. I'll ask our clients, imagine you've got this agoraphobia and you're sitting in the room with me right now in my counseling space, and your anxiety villain is saying, I'm all powerful and I'm telling you, you can't leave the room. You can't leave the room. So I asked the client, can you get up for me and just go over to the door and turn the handle? And the client does this. And I ask, is there anything that the anxiety villain could do in the physical world to stop you from doing that? The answer is no. It can only stop you from doing that if it can make you believe it's powerful enough to do it. Once you cut through that illusion, every time you push back against the problem villain, you'll realize that there's no there. There's actually no material power behind the problem villain's threats. It's all an illusion. And every time you push back, you take a bite out of that illusion, until eventually that illusion becomes so small, it's just too hard to believe anymore. So we'll talk about that because there's more images that I use to explain that. And that'll be for a future episode. And guess what? We're done imagining your life like a movie. I hope that's helpful. And I look forward to talking to you next time. We're going to add this image to our internal art museum, the I Am Podcast Internal Art Museum, and you'll see it pop up in our virtual museum next time. So we've been going through our numbers, and it turns out that we have no viewers. Nobody has ever seen our podcast. I mean, it hasn't been released yet, but I don't think that's an excuse. If you're not watching this now, watch the podcast. And don't forget to click subscribe and punch the like button. Punch the like button and add a comment. That's all I want. All right, this has been a lot of fun. I look forward to talking to you next time. Take care, y'all. Okay, we're all done. Say goodbye, Charlie. Goodbye, Charlie. He's got a good sense of humor. And oddly, speaks in a southern accent. We don't know why.